All right, geometry. So this is for skill 2 for week 1. This is probably the hardest of the 3 skills, so just keep that in mind when you guys are working on these questions. I wanted to remind you one more time before we get started, especially if somebody did this video instead of the first skill video. Sine, cosine, and tangent are the skills we're working with in trigonometry. Sine is the opposite over hypotenuse, cosine is the adjacent over hypotenuse, and tangent is the opposite over the adjacent. So what we're going to be doing for this skill is we're going to be finding missing sides using trigonometry. So our first question would like us to find the missing length of side QR. Side QR isn't labeled in any way, so I know that most of you guys find it a little bit easier to place an X where you are solving. So that's what I'm going to do. Now, just like in skill 1, we still have to identify which side is which. Since we are going to find QR, in order to do that, we have to focus on one of the 2 acute angles in the diagram. Now that's our right angle. That means that R and P are our 2 acute angles. Now, you can solve the problem using this angle, but there's really no reason to do any extra work if you can avoid it. So the first thing we're going to do is work with this angle here since it's given. Now that angle, 63 degrees, will be our focal point. Across from 63 is the side I need to find the length of. And the side across from your angle is always, again, going to be your opposite side. Remember that the side across from the right angle is always going to be your hypotenuse. Now, since this third side is not one of the sides that we are solving for, and it doesn't have a length given to us, even though I know it's the adjacent side, I don't want to focus on that side, or it's going to make more things a bit confusing. So, I have an opposite side that I want to find, and I have a hypotenuse given. Because of that, that's what tells me which of the 3 trig functions to choose when I solve. Opposite and hypotenuse are the 2 for sine. So that's how I know that on this particular problem, I will be choosing sine in order to solve. Here is how you're going to set up each of these problems. First, you're going to write down either sine, cosine, or tangent, depending on which one you've chosen. In this case, we've chosen sine. Directly after sine, cosine, or tangent, you're going to place your angle measurement. In this case, it was 63. You're then going to put an equal sign, and you're going to write down the correct order on the other side for your fraction. One more time, sine is the opposite side on top, hypotenuse on the bottom. So our opposite side is currently marked X, and our hypotenuse is marked 9. So that's how I know to put the X on top and the 9 on the bottom. The last part requires a calculator. Now you have to make sure that your calculator is either a scientific calculator or a graphing calculator typically. If it doesn't have the sine, cosine, and tangent buttons on the calculator, you're not going to be able to do these. So please keep that in mind. Now, what you're going to do is you're going to take the number, and then you're either going to multiply by the trigonometry, or you're going to divide by the trigonometry. The way you know whether to multiply or divide is based on where the variable is located. For this problem, X is on top. And because X is on top, we will end up multiplying. Had this said 9 over x, then x would have been on the bottom, and instead of writing times, we would do divide. But we're actually going to multiply for this problem. 9 times the sine of 63. Now, if you have a scientific calculator, likely nothing needs to be adjusted. But if you have a graphing calculator, like the one I'm using, if I press this button here, which says mode, I need to verify that in the third line down, it's set in degrees. We are solving for things using degrees. If radian is highlighted, you'll want to come down to this line, move the arrow over, and press enter so that it says degree. You can always get back to your home screen on a graphing calculator by hitting second and then hitting the mode button again, and that'll take you back. So, real quickly, we're going to be taking 9 times the sine of 63. Let's read the directions. Write your answer as an integer or as a decimal rounded to the nearest tenth. Now, unlike the trick I showed you in the previous section, we're going to have to round this time. Nearest tenth means 1 decimal place. So, after we type this in, we're going to do a little bit of rounding. 9 times the sine of 63. You're almost always going to get a decimal. There will be a few times where you get some nice answers, but not very often. Remember, when you round to 1 decimal place, you only want to look at the second number. That means that every one of those digits we can ignore. We only care about the 0 and the 1. So when I round to 1 decimal place, that 1 leaves that number alone. So my answer is 8.0. Now, because it rounds off to a whole number, this interface will allow you to just type in 8. So you can see my score is 0. If I just type in 8, I will get the right answer. So I've inserted 8. If I get it correct, we should see the score go up. So before we look at another example, let's just verify that we did this correctly. Submit. And you can see that our score has increased. So it did accept 8 since it rounded off to 8.0. Okay, now there's another thing that can happen when you're solving these, so I want to look at a different example. The process is very much alike. So, I am solving for side QR. I'm going to first place an X there. I need to pick one of the 2 acute angles. I'm choosing the one that's given, 51. I need to identify whether I have opposite, adjacent, or hypotenuse. Across from the angle that I'm working with will always be the opposite, and across from the right angle will always be the hypotenuse. Since the hypotenuse is not the side I'm finding, and since there is no measurement, that's the one we're going to leave alone. That means that X is our only leftover side, which is the adjacent. So this time, I'm finding the adjacent side, and I'm given the opposite side. Let's look at which of the 3 functions uses opposite and adjacent, and that one is tangent. So that's how I know on this problem to use tangent. Just like the previous question, I start off by writing down the trig function. After I write down the trig function, I put the angle measurement. And then on the other side is where I'm going to put the fraction. I just have to get the order correct. Tangent is the opposite side on top, and it is the adjacent side on the bottom. So you can see that the big difference is compared to last question, we're using tangent, not sine, and our variable is on the bottom this time. But overall, the difficulty remains the same. I take the number, and I'm either going to multiply or divide by whatever the trigonometry is. Because x is on the bottom of the fraction, that means that I'm going to divide on this question. So just like before, my question is asking me to round to the nearest tenth. When I type this in on the calculator, I need to make sure that I round correctly. So I'll press enter. Notice that we did divide instead of multiply like on the previous question. I'm fortunate enough that it looks like once again the rounding is going to round off to a whole number. 0.4 means that the 4 leaves this value alone, so I round off to 4.0. And if we want to verify that we are getting that correct, in the box I will type in the value of 4. And you can currently see that for this question, it said we were at a score of 60. As long as the score goes up, we know we got it correct. And there you go. So guys, that's the end of skill number 2 for the week. I changed the lighting a tiny bit for this one. I'm going to see which one's better and use that for skill number 3. If you have any questions about this one, make sure you ask those questions. But I'll see you in the next video.